Treyarch released their brand new DLC 2 map, The Tomb. And as I'm sure you can already guess, there is dissent inside of the community. However, this time the contention is not quite as clear-cut as The Tomb, well, it's just a bit of an odd duck. But before we dive in too deep, I'd like to touch on a few things such as Treyarch's marketing, player expectations, and a few other pieces of information before we start to get into the nitty-gritty regarding mechanics and all of that good stuff. So first things first, I think we need to understand how Treyarch portrayed this map in the marketing and how it kind of set up false expectations inside of the player base. We're seeing people say that, oh, the map is lame, it doesn't have that much depth, it doesn't have a ton of replayability, it's just kind of bare bones. And to an extent, I do agree. But I want to zoom out with you for a second, and I want to talk about something that Zombies fans were talking about years ago during Cold War's era, when we finally were kind of getting this seasonal content method in full force. We had seen something like that in Black Ops 4, but it was really hitting its stride after Modern Warfare 2019 inside of Cold War, where we were getting seasonal updates, mid-season updates, and Zombies was just getting completely left in the dust. And a lot of people were saying, you know what, let's actually have a small map and a big map. That way, you know, at a season launch, we'll have something the size of like Terminus or D-Machine, and then mid-season update, we can get something more like Kino or Groston House, or a tiny map where we can just have some survival fun, nothing crazy. And it seems like we're getting that with Black Ops 6. Now, I think why there is some confusion here is usually at this point in the game's life cycle, we would be nearing the end of the Zombies map run, if you will. Normally, this time in a Call of Duty life cycle, when we have 4 maps, that means we have maybe 1 or 2 left in the life cycle to go, depending on how many there are at launch. So I can see why there is some confusion here. But if we think about what The Tomb has to offer, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, and we compare it to kind of what we had hoped for back in the days of Cold War or Vanguard or MWZ or whatever, getting a big map and then a small map and then a big map and then a small map. That's almost been the dream for Zombies fans for a long time. And imagine with me, if you will, let's say we roughly get 9 to 12 maps by the end of the year that have little Easter eggs, little boss fights, cutscenes, story information. Some have less, some have more. I think that would be pretty damn cool. Rather than getting Onslaught and Outbreak and MWZ, having a year of 9 to 10 to 11 to 12 Zombies maps would be pretty much unheard of inside of our community. And I kind of am hoping and thinking that's where Treyarch may be going. Now, it might not be 9, 10, 11, 12, but what if it's 8? Ending the year with 8 great maps, I think that would be pretty fantastic. Now, let's talk about what this means inside of The Tomb, because when you take what is inside of The Tomb and you connect it to that marketing that Treyarch was doing before the release, I think that's kind of where there's a big disconnect. And since we don't know what's in Treyarch's head, and we're never going to know until the end of the game's life cycle, it makes things contentious, for lack of a better term. Inside of the marketing, Treyarch was really trying to hit home that this was similar to Liberty Falls, but we didn't know exactly what that meant. Liberty Falls had a ton of lore packed into it. It had full-fledged cutscenes. It had tons of new characters, old characters. It was revitalizing areas of the storyline. It had tons of side quests. It wasn't the greatest artistically, but there were some overall positive qualities to the map writ large. And then when we look at The Tomb, it has good art direction, it has good gameplay, the story sucks. The marketing kind of felt like it was supposed to be a bigger deal than it was, but you get into the map and there's a dichotomy that you can feel, you can sense it. And the map overall, it's just strange. So let's dive into each of these points consecutively about The Tomb, and we can talk about where it's thriving and where it's missing the mark in some key areas. So the first area I think it's really succeeding is the art direction. You just go from space to space to space, and you can feel the transitory elements working in your favor as you are just bringing zombies with you from area to area. I absolutely love that. There are lots of different uses of lighting, lots of different color palettes that you can see moving from area to area inside of the catacombs. And not to get too much into my personal life, but when I was younger, I had the luxury of being able to go over to Europe. I went to France and I went to Italy when I was in high school, and I got to see these buildings where they used to use the remains of these priests and religious figures, and the way that the skulls were put inside of the walls and on the staircases and even in the chandeliers of some of these buildings. It was wild. It looked just like these catacombs. It was amazing. So being able to see this artistic fantasy style element brought to life, it was unbelievable. I really love seeing this inside of The Tomb specifically. And even though the map does have a smaller scope and scale, it doesn't feel that tiny. You know, you can make it around the map pretty quickly, but each area feels very unique, feels very custom built. It doesn't feel like Treyarch just threw this together in 5 minutes and was like, oh, here's a new map. It does seem like they really took their time with the art and level design, as each play space is viable. You can go where Stamina Up is, or you can go where Deadshot is. It doesn't really matter where you want to go. With the ice staff and whichever guns you're trying to level up or just use for fun, you can have a pretty damn good time no matter what. And that is a sign of a map with great level design. And I'm sure that once we dig deep into the tomb's secrets and learn all of its exploits, we'll be able to figure out where all the best spawn locations are and like churn through rounds, or, you know, utilize the map to our advantage in order to drive through the Easter egg, whatever it is we're looking for. We'll get to know that over time. But right now, there is no area that's like off limits in terms of playability. And I find that to be really fantastic, because a lot of the times there's just throwaway areas and maps that players just don't typically use because there's no real justification to go over there if you know you're just going to get killed by the horde. So Treyarch, you guys did a really fantastic job there. As far as the main quest goes, I love it. I personally love it. I think that Treyarch has done a better job with Liberty Falls and the Tombs quests compared to Terminus and Citadel de Mor. And it seems like there is a bit of a balance with how they are creating these quests depending on the size or the scope of the map. With Terminus and Citadel de Mor, those are more of their big, full, lush experiences where they want the Easter egg to be a little bit more streamlined because it's ending with a very epic pinnacle boss fight. Whereas in the Tomb and Liberty Falls, since they have a ending boss rush mode, they are making the quest a little bit more traditional in the sense of a Black Ops 3 quest or a Black Ops 4 quest, where the steps are a little bit more tedious, they're a little bit more difficult, but they ramp up really nicely. And my main problem with Black Ops 4 is that the quests are just not long enough. And if Liberty Falls or the Tomb had a longer quest that allowed us to exponentially get to the ending, I think that would be perfect. But that path of difficulty, the path of tediousness, it just gradually ramps up perfectly for my particular playstyle. But since these maps don't have boss fights, I think that's why they designed it that way, because the payoff is not as huge and they don't care if you have to start over because it's so short and you can just enjoy the quest. Whereas with Terminus or Citadel de Mor, it's all about getting through the quest with simple logic puzzles to get to the main payoff, which is a epic boss battle. And now I know the boss battle for this particular map is pretty difficult, but it is just a horde rush mode at the end of the day. Now, when it comes to building and upgrading the ice staff, I love that. I think they did such a good job with designing that quest. It's challenging. It's not overly tedious. It's just tedious enough, and they brought in some RNG elements, which we haven't had in quite a while. I can't remember the last time we've had maps with a lot of RNG baked in, but they had just enough using the Dark Ether lanterns in order to have us build and upgrade this ice staff. I love that. Thought it was super good gameplay design. And I know that I personally prefer the more tedious quests. So for somebody else, it may not be your thing. I totally get that. But for me, that is exactly what I like, leading towards a difficult and ending final encounter. So all of this is really perfect to me. And they utilize the map in a really lovely way. You actually have to utilize your surroundings with the tools in your toolkit. It's not just go up and press square and grab thing and put thing in box or whatever, like it is in Citadel de Mor and in Terminus, or where they're spelling things out for you. I thought that those Easter egg quests were very lame in comparison to even Liberty Falls or the Tombs. While I wish the Tombs and Liberty Falls were longer, I still think they were designed in a more traditional manner, kind of like old Treyarch in a way. And so when it comes to the boss fight being the Sentinel artifact, I do think that's a little bit strange. I was hoping for a little bit more. I was hoping that Samantha Maxis would like come out of the Dark Ether and we could hear her voice like thundering through the clouds, and the Sentinel artifact would be beaming in enemies, which it did do that part, but I was hoping that there would be more of a narrative reason for why the Sentinel artifact was attacking and Sam would have been in charge of it. But overall, the boss fight is interesting. I have never seen Treyarch really adhere to this style of gameplay before. Obviously, they did it in Liberty Falls, so we know that they can do it, but the last time we saw a rush mode like this was in World War II Zombies in the Darkest Shore, so it's been quite a while since we have seen this kind of gameplay inside of Zombies, and Treyarch's done it twice inside of Black Ops 6. I think this time they have done a much better job of designing this boss fight. I know it's very challenging, I know it's tricky, but guys, you're supposed to to die, you're supposed to do it again. That's the whole point. You don't want to beat it on your first try. You want it to take you a few tries to get through it. That's literally the whole point. So whatever's one-shotting you or whatever's killing you, give it some time to figure out the pros and cons of the fight. We don't need to know all of the map secrets in one day. We're allowed to take our time, enjoy the experience, and once Treyarch gets enough data or can hear our calls into the ether, pun intended, they can balance things later and make it a more fun experience. The game's not going anywhere. We have time. It's been literally about 30 hours, if that. And now this kind of leads me into the gameplay side of things. So far, we've talked about art design, the level design, the Easter egg, and now I would like to discuss a little bit about the actual gameplay loop itself. I personally think it's fantastic. I know that there are a lot of people who are upset about the amalgam coming back, the mimic coming back, doppelgast coming back, but if you do think about it narratively, it kind of makes a little bit of sense. I'm not trying to be one of those guys who just kind of hits the narrative points, but it does make a little bit of sense as this is a sacrificial Easter egg that we're utilizing to break down this barrier in order to get into the Sentinel artifact. Now, I know Treyarch are the architects of this particular narrative, so they can do whatever the hell they want. I understand that. I'm with you. However, I felt like the enemies fit really well in this map. Every time I see the amalgams in another map, I feel like they fit better in that map than the previous map. Amalgams fit better in Citadel de Mor and the Tomb than they do in Terminus. I think that the Doppelgast fits better here than it does in Citadel de Mor. It's almost like the boss enemies were utilized too early where they should have been positioned for another map later down the line. That's kind of the confusing part to me in terms of Treyarch's enemy design. That being said, I understand that there is a lot of boss spam, but when you have the Ice Staff upgraded, it crushes everything. So it makes killing the amalgams and the doppelgasts and the mimics, makes killing them a breeze. So I'm really not too worried about having all of the enemy spam in terms of the bosses because the Ice Staff is just so effing overpowered. However, there is a little bit of an issue when it comes to that magical feeling of individuality and unique narrative that spans from map to map. And when you have reused enemies, when you have reused wonder weapons like the Ice Staff, it does ruin things a little bit as why should I go to the Tomb versus Origins, you know? Like having a special wonder weapon or special enemies in a unique zombies map with its own special story makes me more compelled to go back to it later on so I can experience those individual unique gameplay mechanics or story mechanics. And so while the Ice Staff is fun to build, it's a great wonder weapon, it's super powerful, I can experience that in Origins. I can experience the amalgam in Terminus. I can experience the manglers in 500 different maps. I can experience the doppelgast in the Tomb and inside of Citadel, as opposed to having their own unique identity. These maps are taking the narrative and spreading it so thin that I am concerned for the future of DLC maps going forward. Now, this is a really good transition into the narrative itself because the narrative is clearly the weakest point of the Tomb. And I will be, of course, doing a deeper dive into the Tomb in general, but at face value, it's quite a shame. I don't know if this has to do with the AI debacle with the voice actors and the strike that's ongoing with the unions out in California. I don't know if this map was just meant to be a bonus map, a smaller map, therefore we didn't want as much narrative exposition in it. But when you have the setup from Terminus to Liberty Falls where Richtofen's getting trapped and Sam is down there in the mansion's basement, and then you have Richtofen's father dying in our arms, nothing is getting resolved. We're just kicking the can down the road again and again and again. And the building of the Dark Ether took place in Cold War, and it's been 5 years, and we still know nothing about Richtofen. We still know nothing more about Sam after she was trapped inside of the Dark Ether. We still have nothing to show for all of the information we have learned. We have learned a lot, and a couple narrative threads got tied from Terminus. Don't get me wrong. We kind of got out of the prison. We broke free. We went to go capture the Sentinel artifact. All that's great, but there's just more questions that are unanswered than ever before. So that was a really big L from Treyarch in terms of how they wanted to present this map. And while the cutscene was interesting, and we learned that, you know, Sam is probably going to be causing some sort of dissent inside of our crew, I am excited that we're going to go to this mansion. I think that's going to be a really good experience. I love seeing that T-Rex inside of the cutscene in Liberty Falls and seeing Richtofen's office or his bedroom rather, and him going down in those elevators. Like, all of that's going to be really cool. There's going to be probably a lab. There's going to be an outside area. There's going to be an inside with that staircase probably. It's probably going to be pretty sick. A lot of assumptions there, but I do think it's going to be a bigger DLC. We probably won't see it until March or April at the very earliest, if I would assume. But I do think that's going to be an interesting map, and hopefully, finally, we will learn more about what is going on with our crew and what's going on with Richtofen and all that stuff. But what's really been probably the biggest concern for me is the lack of information about the Chaos storyline. At the end of Black Ops 4, well, I guess mid-life cycle of Black Ops 4, when Ancient Evil ended, there was a huge gaping wound, if you will, that was left inside of that storyline that not only could we go anywhere narratively, but the devs, I'm sure, have a lot of assets left over from the game that they were building with the Chaos storyline that they could bring a lot of those amazing ideas into Black Ops 6. And I think we're starting to see that with the Tomb. I'm hoping that Black Ops 6, the first few maps, were just getting the casual player base's feet wet, wetting their whistle, for lack of a better term, getting them prepared for what's to come, and hopefully we're going to see things get a little bit more crazy. Maybe Activision's letting Treyarch off the leash a little bit now that we've kind of brought in that community. We shall see. But there is just so much fantastical storytelling that Treyarch can do with the Chaos storyline, and I just don't get why they're not doing it. So hopefully, now that we have the Sentinel artifact, Weaver, Gray, Peck, whoever, all these people, Maya, Carver, hopefully we start to see a little bit more interesting and exotic ways of interacting with the world. So all in all, I think the Tomb is a really good map. However, when you don't have a solid narrative structure inside of zombies, it makes all of the gameplay mechanics very surface level. So while the Tomb is super fun to play gameplay wise, and while it's great to shoot the ice staff and see that gust of wind circling around the undead, if there's no justification as to why we're doing the things that we're doing, and it's never explained or explored or deepened with puzzles and challenge, then what's the point? So I do think that you should experience the Tomb. I do think that you should go through the Easter egg at least once. I do think that you should get to round 50 or 100 or whatever your preferred is. I think the map is solid. But I do hear the complaints from people who thought Treyarch not only under-promised, but then under-delivered. I get it, but when you zoom back and you kind of think about the map for what it is a solid gameplay experience. It was very well designed. It was beautifully crafted. And so I do think this is a W from Treyarch, and I think that this map will age quite well. And I am very excited to do a deep dive on this map as well. And if you're curious on my other thoughts on Black Ops 6, click the playlist that you're seeing on your screen right here. Thanks for watching. Peace.